Hello, my friend. Welcome to your sleep story. My name is Stephen Dalton. I'm an Irish storyteller, and it's my great privilege to be the voice that you listen to as you go to sleep tonight. You may remember my Irish Vet series about a man called Michael who lived in the County of Kerry many years ago and went around the various farms visiting the animals and of course the farmers. Well, tonight I've decided to put all of those stories together and to add some calming music created by an Irish musician friend of mine, and also I've added a concluding chapter at the very end. Okay, let's do the relaxation session first, which will take a few minutes before tonight's sleep story. I'm going to count down from 10 to 1, and as I do, allow yourself to let go more and more. 10. Feel the support of the bed beneath you, or the floor, or whatever you lie upon tonight. And beneath what you lie upon, feel a deeper support, the support of the earth, our home, our constant support. And as you become aware of that support, see if you can sink into this moment a little more now. Just let go a little more now. 9. You are safe. Allow my voice to be an anchor of safety tonight, to be a friend, to be a gentle guide, a guide that only ever brings you to safe places, to warm and cozy places, to places that enable and support your sleep. Trust that my voice is a friend tonight. 8. Feel into your body now. Notice where you might still be holding tonight. Notice where you may have pain or tingling or tension. Notice anything. Maybe you feel something in your feet or in your lower legs or your thighs or your belly, your chest, shoulders, your neck, your back, arms, hands. Or maybe you're like me and you hold tension in your face. Just see if you can soften a little now. This is a time for kindness to yourself and to your body. Seven. The day is done. Whatever has been, has been. Whatever will be, will be. But right now, all you have is this moment. Your thoughts can't change what has gone before. Your thoughts can't change what will come tomorrow. Your brain needs rest now. So, as thoughts come and go now, don't fight them. Don't chase them away. See them for what they are. Thoughts. Then just watch them go like leaves floating away on a moonlit river, or clouds passing through a starlit sky. Six. This is your moment. This is your time. You have earned this moment of kindness to yourself. You deserve to have peace in your life. We all do. So, as you become aware of that fact, as you come to the understanding that we all deserve peace, see if you can settle into this moment a little more now, letting your body know that it's really time for rest. Five. Peace lives within you. It is a constant friend, waiting to be found, waiting to be felt. Where does it live within you? Maybe it's in your heart. Maybe it's in your head. It's up to you to find it. But I promise you it's there. Four. Perhaps allow a little gratitude now. Gratitude for the simple things, for your body, for the shelter you have tonight, for the ones you love and who love you, for the beauty and wonder of this world, of this planet, that you can find when you look for it. Three, begin to engage with your imagination now. Begin to see the beautiful Irish countryside. You're not far from the sea here, and maybe you'll hear the ocean. This is a place and time far away from all that you know. Enjoy the simplicity of it. 2. Checking in with your body one more time now. Finding the places you are holding still. And allowing yourself to give in, to allow the tension to ease away. Your body has worked hard for you today. It's time to give it rest. And 1. Completely letting go now. As I tell you tonight's sleep story. The little car rattled along the winding road, its wheels bouncing lightly over the uneven stones. The narrow lane twisted between low stone walls, their surfaces worn smooth by wind and rain. Ahead, the hills rolled out in soft green waves, meeting the sky in a gentle haze. Welcome to 1930s Ireland, to County Kerry to be precise, and to the world of Michael O'Shaughnessy, the Irish country vet. Michael adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, leaning forward slightly as the car climbed a steep incline. He knew these roads as well as his own pocket. Each turn and dip etched into his memory from years of travelling between farms and villages. The familiar jostle of the car was almost comforting, a part of the rhythm of his days. At the crest of the hill, he slowed the car and let it coast for a moment, glancing out at the view. Below, a patchwork of fields stretched toward the distant sea. The glint of water just visible where the horizon met the land. Here and there, clusters of whitewashed cottages were tucked into the landscape, their thatched roofs blending into the soft, muted tones of the countryside. Michael reached over to the passenger seat, where his worn leather satchel rested, its buckles scuffed from years of use. Inside were the tools of his trade, medical implements, bottles of medicine, and the well-thumbed notebook where he kept careful records of every animal he treated. His first call of the day was just a few miles further, at a small farm nestled at the edge of a glen. He'd been there many times before to tend to the cows in the stone-walled pasture, and once to stitch a gash on the old sheepdog, Seamus. The farmer, Mr. O'Connell, was a quiet man, but he always met Michael with a nod and a strong handshake. The car rattled on, the sound of the engine blending with the faint bleating of sheep from a nearby hillside. The road ahead dipped into a shaded hollow where the branches of hawthorn trees arched overhead, forming a natural tunnel. Michael slowed again, savoring the stillness of the moment. The world here moved at its own pace, unhurried and steady, like the rhythm of the land itself. The narrow lane opened up as Michael approached the O'Connell farm, the hedgerows giving way to a wide gravel yard. The familiar sight of the low stone cottage greeted him, its whitewashed walls glowing softly in the morning light. Beside it stood the barn, its red painted door slightly ajar, and in the corner of the yard a weathered sheepdog lifted its head from where it lay curled in the morning sun. Michael pulled the car to a stop and stepped out, smoothing his coat as he walked toward the house. Seamus barked once in greeting, his tail thumping the ground as Michael passed. "You're a loyal old lad, aren't you?" Michael said with a smile, crouching for a moment to give the dog a scratch behind the ears. Seamus sniffed his hand, then rested his head back on his paws, clearly satisfied. The cottage door opened, and Mr. O'Connell stepped out, wiping his hands on a rag. He was a stout man, his face weathered and lined, with a cap perched firmly on his head. "Ah, Michael," he said, his voice as steady and measured as ever. "Good to see you. I wasn't expecting you so early." The roads were quiet this morning," Michael replied, straightening up. "How's the herd? Anything pressing? Or is this just a routine call?" O'Connell gave a small shrug, motioning towards the barn. "A bit of both, I'd say. One of the heifers isn't quite herself, off her feed and lying down more than usual. I thought it best to have you take a look. And there's young Seamus there," he added, nodding toward the sheepdog. "Still favouring that leg of his now and again. But he's an old man, same as me." Michael chuckled, following O'Connell towards the barn. "Well, let's have a look at that heifer first. We'll see what's troubling her, and then I'll give Seamus a quick check-up too." Inside the barn, the air was cooler and carried the faint, familiar scent of hay and livestock. The heifer was lying in a corner, her large eyes watching them warily as they approached. Michael moved slowly, his voice calm as he spoke to the animal. "There now, girl," he said softly, crouching beside her. "Let's see what's the matter, eh?" He reached into his bag for his stethoscope, looping it around his neck as he began his examination. Mr. O'Connell leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, watching with a quiet intensity that seemed to come naturally to farmers. "She's one of the better ones," O'Connell said after a moment. "Good temperament, steady milker. Hate to see her like this." Michael nodded, his hands steady as he worked. "We'll get her sorted, don't you worry. She's a strong one." The heifer let out a low, rumbling sigh as Michael finished his check. He stood and turned to O'Connell with a faint smile. "Bit of a fever, but nothing too serious. I'll give her a shot to help with the inflammation and leave you some powder for her feed. She should perk up in a day or two." Relief flickered across O'Connell's face. "Good to hear," I appreciate it, Michael. Always do. Michael gave a small nod, already turning his attention to the dog in the yard. Right, let's see if Seamus will let me check that leg of his. He always was a bit suspicious of vets. And so Michael stepped back out into the yard, glancing up at the sky. The clouds were lower now, a soft grey blanket stretching across the horizon. The morning light had taken on a cooler hue, and the faint breeze carried a hint of dampness. It wasn't raining yet, but the air had that expectant stillness that always seemed to come just before. Seamus the dog had moved to the edge of the yard, his tail wagging slowly again as Michael approached. The old dog seemed to welcome Michael. Come on then, Michael called, crouching down and patting his knees. Let's see how that leg's holding up, eh? After a moment's hesitation, Seamus hobbled over, his gait uneven but determined. Michael reached out and ran his hands gently along the dog's leg, feeling for any sign of swelling or tenderness. Seamus tolerated it with the resigned patience of an animal used to being fussed over, his nose twitching as he sniffed at Michael's jacket. Still stiff, Michael murmured, glancing back at O'Connell, who had followed him out of the barn. Nothing new there, but I'll give you some ointment to rub into the joint. It'll help with the ache when the weather is like this. O'Connell nodded, tucking his hands into his pockets. Poor lad feels it, same as I do. I swear I can tell when rain's coming just by the way my knees start complaining. Michael smiled faintly, straightening up and giving Seamus a fond pat on the head. Well, he's earned a bit of stiffness in his old age, hasn't he? Good working dog like this. He's done you proud. Seamus gave a short wag of his tail, as if in agreement, before ambling back to his spot near the barn. Michael turned back to the car, wiping his hands on a cloth and tucking his tools neatly back into the satchel. The first drops of rain came just as he was fastening the satchel's buckle. They were light at first, barely more than a drizzle, but steady enough to darken the stones underfoot. Michael glanced up at the sky again, watching as the clouds thickened, their edges blurring into one another. Looks like you were right, he said to O'Connell, with a nod toward the sky. It's setting in now. The farmer pulled his cap lower over his brow, his face thoughtful as he looked out over the fields. A soft day, he said quietly, the very Irish phrase, carrying the weight of generations who had known and weathered this land. Michael smiled, climbing back into the car and rolling down the window slightly to call out, "I'll be back later in the week to check on her, and let me know if Seamus gives you any trouble." O'Connell waved him off, his figure already fading into the misty rain, as Michael eased the car back onto the lane. The rain picked up as he drove, the drops tapping gently against the windscreen, blurring the hedgerows into green and grey smudges. His next stop was a farm just outside the village of Clohorn, tucked into the crook of a low valley where the fields ran right up to the base of the mountains. And the car's tires squelched on the wet gravel as he turned into the yard, where a huddle of chickens scattered at his arrival, clucking indignantly as they darted out of the way. The farmhouse door opened before he could even step out of the car, and a wiry man in a flat cap appeared, waving a hand to him. "Michael, you're a sight for sore eyes," the man called. It was Liam Roach, one of the younger farmers in the area, with a sharp wit and a ready laugh that often masked his deep care for his animals. "What's the trouble, Liam?" Michael asked, grabbing his satchel and stepping out into the rain, which was now falling in soft, misty sheets. "It's the sow," Liam said, his tone growing serious as he motioned toward the barn. "She's due any day now, but she's restless, off her feed, and I can't make head nor tail of what's bothering her." Michael nodded, following Liam toward the barn. Inside, the air was warm and close, filled with the mingling scents of straw and livestock. The sow was lying in a far pen, her massive body shifting restlessly as she snorted and pawed at the bedding. Michael approached slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. "There now, girl. There now. Let's have a look at you." He knelt beside her, pulling on a pair of gloves from his satchel. The sow's breathing was heavy but steady, her eyes watching him with a wary intelligence. "She's been like this since yesterday," Liam said, leaning on the pen door. "Tried tempting her with the mash she likes, even a bit of apple, but she's having none of it." Michael reached out, his hands methodical, as he examined her sides and belly, feeling for any sign of distress. He was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, he sat back on his heels and looked up at Liam. "She's close, but there's no sign of trouble. Just a bit of discomfort as things shift into place. Typical for this stage," Michael said, his voice calm. "I leave you something to ease her discomfort, but she's healthy. You'll want to keep a close eye on her tonight, though. If she starts farrowing, send someone for me straight away." Liam exhaled a breath he'd been holding, a faint smile breaking through his worry. "You've no idea how glad I am to hear that. I was half convinced something was wrong." She's a sturdy one," Michael replied, standing and brushing the straw from his knees. "Trust her instincts, and you will be knee-deep in piglets before you know it." Liam chuckled, shaking his head. "A fine way to spend the night, eh?" Michael grinned, packing away his tools. "Could be worse, Liam. Could be a calving in the middle of a storm." As they stepped back out into the yard, the rain was heavier now, falling in soft, steady sheets that soaked the ground and sent the chickens darting for shelter. Michael pulled his coat tighter around him, his thoughts already turning to the next call. He bid goodbye to Liam, got into the car, and started driving again. He turned back onto the narrow lane, the tires kicking up water as they splashed through shallow puddles. He loved this land. Driving through Kerry was unlike driving anywhere else in the world, he often thought. Not that he'd driven many places, only around Ireland a bit. But nonetheless, despite his limited travel, something in him knew that this beautiful county of Kerry was unlike almost anywhere else on planet Earth. Of that he was sure. His next stop was Mrs. O'Shea's cottage, perched at the end of a long, winding track just outside Dingle. The house had stood for as long as Michael could remember, its stone walls weathered and sturdy against the elements. A small plume of smoke curled from the chimney, promising the warmth of a fire inside. As he pulled into the yard, Michael spotted two small terriers waiting by the gate, their wiry coats already damp from the rain. One of them barked, its tail wagging furiously, while the other stayed close to the ground, its ears flattened and its tail tucked. That would be the sick one, Michael thought, already noting the difference in their behavior. Mrs. O'Shea appeared in the doorway, a shawl draped around her shoulders. She was a small woman, with bright eyes and a face etched with the lines of a long and busy life. "Come in, Michael, come in," she called, beckoning him towards the house. "You'll be soaked to the skin if you stand out there a moment longer." Michael grabbed his bag and hurried to the door, the rain drumming on the brim of his hat. The moment he stepped inside, the warmth of the cottage enveloped him, along with the unmistakable scent of turf smoke from the fire crackling in the hearth. The little terriers trotted in behind him, the healthy one bounding ahead, while the sickly one lingered at his heels. On the hearth rug, a large tabby cat stretched lazily, blinking at him with disinterest, before curling back into a contented ball. Mrs. O'Shea closed the door firmly behind him. "Thank God you're here. It's poor Finn, my little lad. He's not been himself for days now, barely eating, and he's been coughing something terrible." Michael set his bag on the small wooden table by the fire, kneeling to greet the dog properly. "Come here, Finn. Let's see what's troubling you." The terrier crept closer, his movements hesitant but trusting. Michael ran his hands gently along the dog's ribs, feeling the slight tremble beneath the wiry coat. Finn's nose was dry and warm, and his breathing was shallow, each exhale accompanied by a faint, raspy sound. "Lungs sound a bit congested," Michael murmured, reaching for his stethoscope. "Could be a touch of pneumonia. Nothing we can't handle, though." Mrs. O'Shea stood by the fire, wringing her hands. "Oh, I've been worried sick. He's such a dear little thing, always at my heels." and now he barely moves unless I coax him." Michael gave her a reassuring smile. "He'll be fine, Mrs. O'Shea. I'll give him an injection to help clear the infection, and I'll leave you with some medicine to keep him comfortable. You've caught it early, and that makes all the difference." As he prepared the injection, the fire crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow over the small room. The cat stretched again, yawning luxuriously, while the other terrier nosed curiously at Michael's bag. Finn sat quietly, his head tilted, as though he understood this was for his own good. "There we go," Michael said gently, as he administered the injection. "He'll be feeling better in no time. Just keep him warm and give him plenty of rest." Mrs. O'Shea sighed with relief, kneeling to gather Finn into her arms. "Thank you, Michael. You're a godsend, truly. I don't know what I'd do without you." Michael stood, brushing his hands off and giving her a kind smile. "Just doing my job, Mrs. O'Shea. But if he's not improving in a few days, send word to me, and I'll be back." "Now you're not rushing off just yet," Mrs. O'Shea said firmly, setting Finn down gently on the hearth rug beside the cat. "You'll have a cup of tea first. You can't be tearing around in this weather without something to warm you." Michael smiled, knowing better than to protest. "Well, if you're offering, Mrs. O'Shea, I won't say no. I could do with a break before the next call anyway." "Good man," she replied, bustling to the little kitchen alcove. The sound of the kettle being filled and the soft clatter of cups and saucers followed, blending with the rain's rhythm against the window. Michael settled into one of the worn armchairs near the fire, stretching out his legs and letting the warmth seep into him. Finn gave a small sigh, curling into a tighter ball, while the other terrier circled once before flopping onto the rug with a contented puff. Mrs. O'Shea returned with a tray, the teapot steaming, and a plate of thick slices of soda bread, alongside a dish of butter. She poured for them both, handing Michael a cup, before taking her seat in the other armchair. "So," she began, stirring her tea thoughtfully, "you'll have heard about young Molly Connell, I suppose?" Michael shook his head, biting into a slice of soda bread. It was still warm, the butter melting into the crumb. "Can't say I have. What's happened?" "Oh, it's a grand story altogether," she said, her eyes sparkling. "He's taken up with that O'Donoghue boy from over in Ventry. You know the one, Michael O'Donoghue's youngest. tall lad with the red hair that looks like it's on fire in sunlight. Michael nodded, chuckling. I know him. Always had a way with the horses, as I recall. That's the one, she said, leaning forward slightly. Well, Molly's father's none too pleased, so he isn't. Says the Donohues are nothing but trouble, and that Molly's far too young to be running after any boy, let alone one from Ventry. Michael laughed softly, shaking his head. And what does Molly have to say about it? Oh, she's as stubborn as a mule, that one, Mrs. O'Shea said with a grin. Told her father that she'll marry him or no one at all. You know, I admire her spirit. Reminds me of myself at her age. But I do pity her poor father. He's a good man, just set in his ways. They sat quietly for a moment, the rain tapping steadily on the windows. Michael sipped his tea, savouring the warmth and the momentary pause in his day. And how's your sister getting on in Tralee? He asked, setting his cup down. Oh, sure, she's grand, Mrs. O'Shea replied, waving a hand. Still running that little shop of hers. Says the tourists are starting to come earlier in the year now. She had an American couple in last week, looking for souvenirs. Can you imagine? Not even June, and they're already poking about the place like it's high summer. Michael smiled, picturing the scene. It's a wonder they even find their way to Tralee, with how some of these roads are. That's the truth of it, she said. You'd swear half of them think Ireland's just Dublin and a few castles. They don't know what they're missing here in Kerry. The room grew quieter again. The rain filling the silence like a soft melody. Michael glanced at the clock on the mantel, reluctant to leave the warmth of the fire, but knowing there were still miles to go before the day was done. But eventually he bid goodbye to Mrs. O'Shea and little Finn and the other animals, and the rest of Michael's day passed in a blur of winding roads and steady rain, each stop blending into the next. A lame cow here, a handful of restless sheep there, and a chat with a farmer about the coming weather as he packed up his tools. And before he knew it, the light was fading, and he was back home, the familiar sight of his cottage welcoming him through the misty evening. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, and Moira, his wife, was already settled in her armchair, a book and their cat resting on her lap. Michael hung his coat by the door as he was greeted by their Irish red setter, Con, and the scent of turf smoke, and the faint aroma of stew were lingering from supper, greeting him as he stepped into the room. He eased into the chair across from Moira, and Con planted himself at his feet, and Michael put a blanket over his knees and reached for his own book. Outside, the rain continued to fall, pattering softly against the windows and roof, its rhythm a gentle counterpoint to the stillness inside. Moira glanced up from her reading, a faint smile on her lips. "Busy day?" "Busy enough," Michael replied, his voice low, as though not to disturb the quiet. "Seamus is stiff. Finn has a touch of pneumonia, and I'll be waiting for word about his sow and her piglets by morning." Moira chuckled softly, turning a page. "Sounds about right." They sat together in companionable silence, and now and again Michael would tell her a bit more. A funny comment from Mrs. O'Shea, the sight of hills cloaked in rain. But mostly they were content just to be. Michael leaned back in his chair, his book resting loosely in his hands, and thought for a moment how good it was to be here, in this place, with Moira, at the end of a long, satisfying day. Michael opened his eyes to the grey light of dawn creeping into the room. The house was quiet, save for the faint tick of the clock on the mantel downstairs. For a moment, he stayed still, listening to the sound of the world outside. The soft rattle of leaves stirred by the breeze, the distant call of a bird perched somewhere in the hedgerow. There was no rush to rise. The day would begin when it was ready, as it always did. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, the wooden floor cool under his feet, and reached for the cardigan draped over the chair. It was heavy with the scent of the outdoors, of earth and wool, a comfort on these early mornings. Moira stirred slightly, murmuring something indistinct, before turning onto her side. The quilt pulled snug around her shoulders. He let her sleep a little longer. The mornings were hers to keep for herself until the kettle whistled. Moving through the hallway, Michael avoided the floorboards he knew would creak. The house was old, its walls thick, and its rooms modest, but it carried a warmth that could only come from years of quiet living. Downstairs, he set the kettle on the stove, lighting the match with practiced ease and holding it steady until the flame took. The low hiss of the fire brought a familiar kind of company to the room. As the water heated, Michael stepped outside, pulling his cardigan tighter against the cool morning air. He could hear the ocean in the distance. The sound of it was such a soothing thing to him. This was home. This was his place. The yard was still and damp, the cobblestones darkened by the overnight dew. The hens were already stirring in their coop, scratching at the straw, and one of them let out a throaty cluck as if to greet him. He decided to get some eggs. Sliding back the latch of the coop, Michael crouched low, murmuring to the hens in the same tone he might use with a nervous calf. "Good morning, girls. Let's see what you've left for us today." He reached into the straw-lined nests, his hands careful and practiced, pulling out one warm egg after another. Each was placed into a basket, their shells smooth and cool to the touch. The hens bustled around his legs, clucking their mild discontent, as though accusing him of theft. As he stood to leave, he paused for a moment, looking out over the low stone wall at the fields beyond. There was a mist out there, but he could still see the faint outlines of sheep scattered across the far hill. The sun hadn't yet broken through, but there was a brightness behind the clouds that hinted it might later. But you never know in Ireland, he thought. 1 second sunshine, the next rain. Back inside, Moira had risen, her hair pinned up loosely as she reached for the flour jar on the shelf. She measured it out, without needing to check, her movements unhurried but efficient, the way they always were. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying the kind of ease that only came with years of sharing mornings like this one. Michael nodded with a smile, pouring the hot water into a teapot and letting it steep. He then went to give her a hug, as he always did in the morning, kissed her on the forehead, and said, "Good morning, my darling Moira. How did you sleep?" She looked up at him, with kindness and love in her eyes. "Very well, my Michael, very well." He brought 2 cups to the table, setting them down as Moira placed a slab of butter in its dish, ready for the bread and eggs that were still to come. They didn't talk much. They rarely did in the mornings. The quiet wasn't a silence to be filled, but rather a comfort they'd long settled into. He then set about making the eggs. He cracked 2 into a bowl. The yolk, bright and golden against the white. Moira handed him a fork, and he began to beat it gently, the rhythmic motion filling the small kitchen with its quiet sound. Together they worked in their familiar rhythm, Moira tending to the stove, while Michael poured the beating eggs into the waiting pan. As the smell of cooking filled the room, Michael glanced toward the clock on the mantel. The morning callers would soon arrive, bringing with them their small dramas and quiet concerns. For now, though, the day was still theirs, and he let himself savor the simple peace of this shared moment. After breakfast, Michael wiped his hands on a linen towel and glanced out the window. It was time to open the practice. The practice was a modest affair, just one room with a wooden examination table and shelves lined with jars, bottles, and tins, each neatly labeled in Michael's careful hand. The scents of the space were faint but distinct, a mixture of medicinal liniments, dried herbs, and a hint of the polish Moira insisted on applying to the floorboards every month. It was a room of purpose, but it carried the same calmness as the rest of the house, a reflection of the man who worked there. He propped open the door to the yard, letting in the fresh air and signaling to the village that the practice was ready for the day. It didn't take long for the first visitor to arrive. A little boy of no more than 7 came up the path, clutching a wicker basket that shifted and meowed softly with each step. His mother followed behind, her apron still dusted with flour, looking slightly apologetic as they approached. "Morning, Mrs. O'Connell," Michael said, stepping out to meet them. "And young Thomas?" The boy nodded shyly, tightening his grip on the basket, as though afraid its contents might escape. "It's our cat, Doctor," Mrs. O'Connell explained, her voice warm but tinged with worry. "She's not been eating proper these past few days. I thought it might be best to bring her by." Michael crouched slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "Let's have a look at her, shall we?" He gestured them inside, motioning for the boy to set the basket on the examination table. With practiced ease, Michael unlatched the basket and reached in, drawing out a small tabby cat whose coat had lost some of its usual luster. She meowed once, faint and raspy, and settled into his hands as though she knew instinctively he meant her no harm. As he worked, he spoke softly to the boy, explaining what he was doing in simple terms. "She's a bit under the weather, that's all," Michael said, his fingers gently pressing along the cat's belly to check for tenderness. "A tonic and a few quiet days and she'll be herself again." The boy's face lit up with relief, and Mrs. O'Connell offered a grateful smile as Michael handed her a small bottle of liquid medicine. "Give her a spoonful twice a day, mixed in with a bit of water," he instructed, scribbling the details onto a slip of paper. "And if she's not better by the weekend, bring her back to me." The O'Connells left with their spirits lifted, and no sooner had they disappeared down the path than another visitor arrived. A grey-haired farmer with a wicker cage containing 2 restless rabbits. Michael greeted him with the same steady warmth, listening as the man explained how the creatures had been off their feed. The morning passed in this quiet rhythm, one visitor after another. An older woman with a parakeet that had lost its chirp, a young girl with a spaniel whose paw needed cleaning and bandaging, and a man from the far side of the village carrying a box of newborn kittens, their eyes barely open. Through it all, Michael worked with patience and care, his hand steady, his voice reassuring. For many, he was not just a veterinarian, but a source of calm and certainty, someone they could trust, not just with their animals, but with their worries and hopes. By the time the last visitor had left, the day had changed and clouds had moved in. Michael wiped his hands on the cloth he kept near the practice sink, a faint smile on his face as he glanced at the ledger on his desk. 2 calls this afternoon, a light day by any measure. He ran his finger down the page, pausing on the first name, a small farm just outside the village, where a mare had been favouring one leg. He closed the book with quiet satisfaction, moving to gather his bag. The soft patter of rain began just as he stepped outside, a drizzle that turned the cobblestones dark and glistened faintly in the muted light. The sky had shifted, clouds heavy and low, wrapping the village in a veil of grey. Michael paused on the threshold, pulling his flat cap tighter and reaching for his coat. He didn't mind the rain. It was part of this place, part of life here. It was a companion as much as an inconvenience. The old car stood waiting in the yard, its dull blue paint spotted with the first drops of the shower. Michael placed his bag on the passenger seat before sliding in behind the wheel. The door creaked slightly as he closed it, a sound he had long since stopped noticing. He turned the key, the engine sputtering to life, before settling into its familiar rhythm. As he pulled onto the dirt track, the rain grew steadier, drumming gently on the roof and streaking the windshield. The world outside blurred, hedgerows and fields softened by the rain, and Michael felt his mind wander, as it often did on these drives. He was now on the open road, and he began to think of Dublin, of the years he had spent in the city as a young man, immersed in his veterinary studies, and surrounded by the buzz of a world so different from the one he had grown up in. The streets had been loud and alive, the air thick with the smell of coal smoke and the chatter of passing crowds. He had enjoyed it in his own way. The lectures, the nights spent poring over books, the camaraderie of the other students. But even then, he had known he would come back. The decision had never been difficult. Dublin had taught him much about medicine, about the wider world, about himself, but it had never felt like home. Home was here, among the rolling hills and stone walls, by the ocean, where life moved with the seasons, and people knew one another by name. The city had been a teacher, but the country was where he belonged, where he could take what he had learned and put it to use. He thought of his father, a farmer like so many others in this place, who had taught him early on the value of steady hands and quiet persistence. There's no rush to most things, his father had often said, his voice calm as he guided Michael through the work of the farm. Take your time, do it right, and the rest will follow. It was a lesson Michael carried with him still, one he applied as much to stitching a wound as to mending a fence. He arrived at the farm and eased the car to a stop near the gate. The mare was waiting in the stable, her large dark eyes watching him calmly as the farmer approached, hat in hand to greet him. She's been favouring her front leg, Michael, the farmer said, his voice carrying a note of concern. Not lame exactly, but not right either. Michael nodded, his expression thoughtful, as he crouched to examine the mare's leg, his fingers tracing gently over the tendons and joints. The rain tapped softly on the stable roof above, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the calm of the moment. Nothing serious, he said after a few minutes, standing and dusting his hands. A bit of strain, most likely. Rest her for a few days, and I'll leave you some liniment to rub in twice a day. She'll be right as rain before long. The farmer's face eased, his gratitude evident, as he thanked Michael and shook his hand. Michael stayed for a moment longer, stroking the mare's neck and murmuring softly to her before returning to the car. He was driving now to his next appointment, and he felt a quiet contentment settle over him. These moments, these steady, simple moments of care were what had brought him back here, what made him certain he had chosen the right path. The second and final visit of the day lay ahead, but for now, Michael let the rain and the road carry him forward. The rhythm of his life, as constant, dependable as the landscape around him. The second visit of the day took Michael a little further out, to a small farm tucked at the base of a hill, just next to some beehive huts, which were old monastic settlements from very long ago. The farmer was waiting for him by the barn, cap in hand, a tired smile on his face. "It's one of the calves," the man said as Michael stepped out of the car. not feeding as well as the others. Inside the barn, the calf stood apart from the herd, its small frame thin but alert. Michael crouched beside it, his bag set on the straw-covered floor. His hands moved with quiet efficiency, checking the calf's temperature, its breathing, the texture of its coat. "Nothing to worry about," he said finally, looking up at the farmer. "Just a touch of the chills. Keep him warm. Give him some extra milk for a few days, and he'll be fine." The farmer let out a sigh of relief, his gratitude evident in the firm handshake he offered Michael as he picked up his bag. "You have a way with them, Michael," he said, his voice warm. Michael smiled, tipping his cap as he made his way back to the car. The drive home was peaceful, the rain still falling, and in a way, Michael loved it. Michael felt the pull of home now, as he turned down the familiar lane. The sight of the chimney smoke rising from his cottage, filling him with a quiet contentment. He parked the car and went inside. Moira was already sitting down, doing some knitting, and the warmth of the fire was casting a soft glow across the room. She looked up as he entered, her smile as steady and welcoming as ever. "Long day?" she asked, handing him a cup of tea, before he even had to ask. "Not too bad," Michael replied, easing into his chair by the fire. He stretched his legs out, feeling the quiet ache of the day settle into his bones. The room was filled with the faint crackle of the fire, the scent of turf smoke, mingling with the tea in his hands. They sat in comfortable silence, Moira knitting something soft and grey, while Michael read from his favourite book, and then gazed into the flames, his mind wandering over the small moments of the day. The rain tapping on the roof, the soft whinny of the mare, the boy's shy smile as he carried home his cat. These were the pieces of his life, humble and steady, and he wouldn't trade them for anything. As the evening wore on, the fire burned lower, and the quiet deepened, wrapping the little house in its warmth. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy but content, knowing that tomorrow would bring another day much like this one. Calm, purposeful, and rooted in the place he called home. The car rested by the side of a narrow, quiet lane, its dark frame blending with the muted tones of the morning. Michael O'Shaughnessy stood a few paces away, his hands tucked deep into the pockets of his long coat. The ground beneath his boots was soft from yesterday's rain, and a faint sheen of moisture lingered on the grasses that rolled gently away toward the sea. Ahead, the horizon blurred where the ocean met the sky. The waters stretched out, vast and silver, rippling under the weight of low-hanging clouds. Far out, barely distinguishable through the gathering mist, Skellig Michael, a magnificent rock, rose like a thought not fully formed. Its jagged edges, softened by distance, it seemed to hover between this world and some other place. Its presence, neither loud nor demanding, yet impossible to ignore. The mist was moving closer now, quiet and deliberate, rolling in across the fields and settling over the hedgerows like a veil. Michael watched it come, the kind of mist that didn't rush but filled the space around it with the unhurried patience of time. A dampness hung in the air, clinging to his coat and settling in his hair. He could feel the faintest trace of rain beginning to fall. A fine drizzle that seemed like it might increase in a short time. Standing there, Michael let the stillness take hold, these moments, away from the chatter of people and the low calls of animals, had always brought him clarity. He thought of the long road that had brought him here, not just the road to Kerry, but the one that had led him to this life of quiet, steady work. He thought of the farmers he'd visited, their hands rough from years in the soil, their gratitude quiet but sincere. He thought of the animals too, and the strange lessons they'd taught him without ever speaking a word. A sick calf could teach perseverance. An old sheep, nearing the end of its days, could teach dignity. The rain grew steadier, a gentle patter now against the roof of the car and the brim of his hat. It had filled the air with its rhythm, mingling with the sound of distant waves reaching the shore. Michael breathed in deeply, the scent of wet earth and sea salt grounding him. He turned his gaze back to Skellig Michael, now almost hidden in the thickening mist, and thought of the monks who had once made their home there. What must it have been like to live in that kind of solitude, surrounded by the endless ocean, the wind, and the rain? What truths had they found out there on the edge of the world? Michael shifted his weight slightly, his boots pressing into the softened ground. There was so much he didn't understand about life, about the patterns that seemed to emerge only in hindsight. And yet, he felt certain there was a kind of wisdom in this land, in its constancy and its quiet unfolding. As he stood there, the rain falling steadily now, he thought not of the answers, but of the questions, and how they seemed to stretch out as endlessly as the sea. Now he turned and got into his car. He opened the door with a gentle creak. The familiar scent of leather and engine oil welcoming him as he slid into the driver's seat. He started the car. The hum of the engine merging with the patter of rain His first goal of the day was to be the Donahue farm, just a few miles down the road. The Donahues had sent word a day prior. A young cow was struggling to calve, and they'd done all they could without help. Michael knew the farm well, its fields marked by weathered, dry stone walls, its barn leaning slightly to one side from years of battles with the coastal winds. The family had always been warm and straightforward. They were a part of this land, them and their ancestor. Michael pulled into the farmyard. The familiar sight of the stone farmhouse emerging through the mist. The gravel crunched beneath the car's tires as he parked and stepped out, tipping his hat against the drizzle. Liam Donahue was already waiting, his cap pulled low over his face, his boots caked with mud. "Morning, Michael," Liam said. "He's in the barn. Been at it since the early hours." Michael nodded, following Liam across the yard, his boots squelching in the soft ground. Inside the barn, the air was warm and thick, smelling of hay and animals. The cow lay in the straw, her sides heaving with the effort of labor. Michael set his bag down gently and crouched beside her, his voice low and soothing as he spoke to her and assessed the situation. "Good girl now. Let's have a look," he murmured, his hands steady and practiced. Years of experience had taught him how to move slowly, to let the animal feel his presence without fear. He worked carefully, talking quietly to Liam as he explained what needed to be done. The process was delicate, but straightforward, and within the hour, the calf was delivered. A sturdy little bull, blinking against the light of the barn as he took his first breaths. The cow let out a low, relieved sound, and Michael smiled faintly, stepping back to let her nuzzle her newborn. "She's a strong one, that cow of yours," Michael said, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You'll be right as rain in no time." Liam let out a breath he'd clearly been holding. "Thank you, Michael." Don't know what we'd do without you." Michael waved off the gratitude with a small nod, stepping back into the rain-scented air of the farmyard. As he packed his bag into the car, he thought again of the small but significant moments his work offered, the quiet victories, the steady reminders of life's resilience. He started the car and got on his way, waving goodbye to Liam as he went. The next stop on Michael O'Shaughnessy's route was the Nolan farm, a modest patch of land tucked away behind a cluster of old sycamore trees. He had been called out to see a lame sheep that had been favoring one leg since the week before. The Nolans were a curious pair, in the best sense. Mary and Brendan, husband and wife, who worked the land together as equals. It was uncommon, perhaps, at the time, but it suited them, and Michael had always admired their quiet harmony. As he pulled into the farmyard, Mary was already there to greet him, brushing her hands on her apron and waving him down with a smile. Brendan followed a few moments later, carrying a thick, weathered stick that he used to herd the sheep. Their flock was small but well cared for, and Michael had no doubt that this particular animal had been treated with patience and care in the days before his arrival. "She's in the lower pen," Brendan said, as they walked towards the barn, Mary falling into step beside them. "I reckon it's her hoof. Something stuck, maybe, or a bit of rot." Inside the pen, the ewe stood quietly in the straw, one leg lifted delicately off the ground. Mary moved quickly and calmly, holding the animal steady, as Michael crouched down to examine her. His fingers moved with care, parting the wool and checking each hoof with practiced ease. Sure enough, a small sharp stone was lodged in the tissue, causing the animal pain. "Nothing serious," Michael said, reaching into his bag for the tools he needed. "We'll get this sorted, and she'll be back to her old self soon enough." With Mary keeping the ewe calm, and Brendan shining a lantern for better light, Michael removed the stone and treated the tender area with an ointment to ward off infection. The work was quick and unremarkable in its simplicity, but there was something satisfying in the quiet teamwork of it all. The shared focus of 3 people and 1 sheep, each doing their part. Once the job was done, Mary gave the ewe a gentle pat, and Brendan grinned, his weathered face breaking into lines of relief. "You've done it again, Michael. Won't take her long to recover, will it?" "Not at all," Michael replied, standing and brushing the straw from his trousers. "Just keep her dry for a day or 2, and she'll be fine." As they left the barn, Mary reached out and touched his arm lightly. "You'll stay for tea, won't you? I've just taken a cake out of the oven." Michael hesitated for a moment. It was still early. There was another call to make. But the smell of baking bread and the fact that it was raining so much tipped the decision. "A slice of cake sounds grand," he said with a smile. Inside the house, the fire crackled warmly in the hearth. Michael took a seat at the wooden table as Mary cut generous slices of fruit cake, the kind made dense with raisins and a hint of spice. Brendan poured tea from a battered metal pot, the steam curling upward as the rain continued to fall outside. The conversation turned easily to the happenings of the locality. Mary spoke of the markets in town, how the price of feed had risen, and how Mrs. Walsh's eldest son had come back from America with newfangled ideas about farming. Brendan chimed in with news of a neighbour's bull, which had jumped a fence and caused a bit of chaos before being coaxed back to its field. "And did you hear about young Aisling at the schoolhouse?" Mary asked, setting her teacup down. "She's off to Dublin next month. Her uncle's got her a place at one of those training colleges." Michael nodded, listening with genuine interest. These small pieces of news, the births, the plans, the troubles, were all things that bound the people of this place. It was moments like these, over tea and cake, that Michael truly valued. When the rain eased, Michael finally stood, thanking them both for their hospitality. Mary handed him a small tin with an extra slice of cake for the road, and Brendan saw him to the door, clapping him on the shoulder as he left. "Safe travels, Michael," Brendan called as he stepped back into the kitchen. Michael returned to his car, warmed not just by the tea and cake, but by the quiet kindness of the Nolans and the stories they had shared. As he turned the engine over and drove away, he felt a deep contentment within him. Michael's final call of the day took him to a place that always felt a little out of the ordinary. Nestled in a hollow, beyond a winding stretch of road, was Dunbar Stud, a small but respected horse-breeding farm that catered to the needs of the wealthy landowners in the region. Though Michael had visited many times before, the place always held a quiet sense of importance. There was something so wise about the horses here, something that Michael could never put his finger on. He arrived at the gates, which were painted a deep green and already open. He drove slowly up the gravel path, passing a long row of paddocks where the horses stood grazing despite the damp. He parked near the main stable, stepping out into the earthy scent of wet hay and damp leather. There he was greeted by Seamus Kilroy, the stud's manager. "Michael, good to see you," Seamus called. He was a tall, wiry man with a sharp gaze that seemed to miss nothing. "We've a mare in the foaling barn that's giving us a bit of trouble. Won't let the colt feed properly." Michael nodded, following Seamus toward the barn. The structure was grander than most stables he visited, with thick beams and wide doors, but the work inside was the same, practical and earthy, with no room for airs. Inside, the mare stood in a large stall, her coat gleaming even in the low light. The colt, just a few days old, stood at her side, his spindly legs trembling slightly as he shifted his weight. "She's protective, more than usual," Seamus explained, keeping his voice low as they approached. "Doesn't want anyone near him, not even me," but he's not getting what he needs. Michael observed the mare for a moment, noting the way her ears twitched and her eyes followed their every movement. Protective indeed. He stepped closer with deliberate calm, speaking softly, his tone as much for her as it was for the people watching. There now, girl. Let's have a look. You're doing your best, aren't you? The mare didn't flinch as Michael crouched, his movements slow and measured. He reached for the colt, his hands steady, as he checked the young horse over. The issue was clear enough. The colt's mouth wasn't quite aligned, making it difficult for him to latch on to his mother. It was a minor problem, but one that could lead to trouble if not addressed quickly. Michael stood and turned to Seamus. We'll need to help him feed for now, just until he gets strong enough. I can show you how to guide him properly. Seamus nodded, already moving to fetch what was needed. Together, they worked carefully, Michael demonstrating the best way to support the colt and guide him to the mare. The mare remained watchful but calm, her instincts seeming to sense that they were there to help. When the colt finally began to suckle, Seamus let out a low breath of relief. There you go, lad, Seamus murmured. That's the way. They stayed a while longer to ensure the colt fed properly. The barn quiet, except for the sounds of the animals and the rain outside. When the work was done, Seamus shook Michael's hand firmly. Appreciate it, Michael, he said. That one's going to be something special. I can feel it. Michael gave a small smile, glancing back at the mare and her foal before gathering his bag. Every one of them is special in their own way, but I'll admit, he's got a fine start. As he left the barn, Seamus walked him back to the car. The stud felt peaceful in this rain. The horses grazing quietly in their paddocks, and Michael paused for a moment before opening the car door. Drive safe, Seamus said, tipping his cap. And let's hope we don't need you back too soon. Michael chuckled. Let's hope not, but you know where to find me. He drove away slowly, the road slick with rain, and the light over the countryside moving towards dusk. The day had been long, but as the familiar rhythm of the engine and the rain surrounded him, Michael felt that quiet sense of purpose once again, the kind that came from knowing his work meant something, not just to the people, but to the creatures that shared this land with them. The house was warm when Michael arrived home. The soft glow of the fire spilling out into the hallway as he hung his coat by the door. The rain had followed him all the way, but now, inside, its steady rhythm against the windows seemed a distant, muted, and comforting thing. Moira was in the living room, her knitting resting in her lap as she looked up with a smile. "Long day?" she asked, her voice as familiar and soothing as the crackle of the fire. "Aye," Michael said, crossing the room to sit in his usual chair. "But a good one." She nodded, the kind of nod that spoke of years shared and words unspoken. Michael leaned back, his boots kicked off, and his legs stretched toward the warmth of the hearth. The room fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the pop of the fire and Moira knitting. They sat in silence now, the firelight flickering across the room. Michael closed his eyes, listening to the rain outside and feeling the quiet satisfaction of another day well spent. There was no need for conversation, just the peaceful solitude of two lives lived together, two lives in deep contentment with one another. Another day finished in the life of the Irish country vet. There are days in Kerry that feel less like days and more like gifts. Days that arrive without fanfare, without drama, without any particular invitation, and yet managed to be so quietly, so completely perfect, that you find yourself moving through them slowly, as though afraid that hurrying might break the spell. This was one of those days. Michael O'Shaughnessy woke before the alarm, which he rarely needed, but kept anyway, out of an old habit he had never quite seen the reason to abandon. The room was still and pale, the curtains backlit by a thin, clean brightness that told him, even before he had properly opened his eyes, that the rain had gone. He lay for a moment, listening. No wind, no drumming on the roof, only the tiny sound of a robin somewhere outside the window, very close, singing to itself in that clear and unhurried way robins have, as though they have all the time in the world and are rather pleased about it. He dressed quietly, so as not to wake Moira, who slept on her side, with one hand tucked beneath her cheek, her breathing slow and even. He stood in the doorway for just a moment, looking at her, the way he had done on countless mornings over the years, and felt the same quiet thing he always felt, which he had never been able to name precisely, but which sat somewhere between gratitude and wonder and something very close to disbelief that all of this was his. Downstairs, he set the kettle on and stepped outside. The world had been washed clean. The cobblestones glistened in the early light, and the air had that particular freshness that only comes after a long rain, sharp and green and full of the sea. The fields beyond the low stone wall were impossibly bright. the grass a deep and saturated green that seemed almost to glow. Above the distant hills, the sky was a pale and luminous blue, and the sun, still low, cast long golden shadows across the yard. Michael's trusty red setter pushed out through the door behind him and stood blinking in the light, his nose working furiously, reading the morning the way only dogs can. Then he bounded off across the yard, with his ears flying and his tail whipping the air, and Michael watched him go and smiled. It was going to be a fine day. His only call was in the late morning, a gentle one, and he took the long road there. He could have gone the shorter way. He always could. But on a morning like this, it seemed rather a shame to waste a single mile of it. The little car rattled along lanes, flanked by hedgerows, threaded with the last of the season's blackberries. The berries dark and heavy on their stems, glistening with the overnight dew. Through gaps in the hedges, the sea appeared and disappeared, a deep and brilliant blue today, catching the light in long shifting panels that seemed to move like something alive. The farm belonged to old Patsy Moriarty, who had been a farmer on that land for more years than Michael had been alive, and whose opinion on most subjects was stated briefly and without any particular interest in being disagreed with. His sheepdog, Nell, a quiet and dignified collie, who had delivered 3 litters in her 12 years on this earth, had whelped again 5 days ago, and Patsy had sent the word that he'd like Michael to look over her, more out of care than concern. Michael found them in the barn, Nell stretched out in a bed of clean straw, 7 pups arranged about her in various states of sleep and contentment. Patsy stood at the pen's edge, his cap in hands, watching them with an expression that was as close to tenderness as a man of his disposition could manage. "She did well," Michael said, crouching beside the pen. "7 healthy ones. You can't ask for more than that." Patsy made a sound that meant he agreed, but saw no reason to say so out loud. Michael moved quietly among the pups, checking each one with the gentle efficiency of long practice. They were warm and round and pink-nosed, and they smelled of that particular soft warmth that newborn things have, regardless of their species. One of them, a small female with a white patch on her forehead, opened her eyes very slightly as Michael's hand passed over her, squinting against the light of the barn before closing them again and returning with great determination to sleep. "She'll be a clever one, that," Michael said. Patsy looked at the pup with narrowed eyes. "She'll be the trouble, more like." But he said it with the ghost of a smile. Michael sat with them a while longer than was strictly necessary. Nell watched him with her calm amber eyes, and he scratched behind her ears and told her she had done very well. And she accepted this information with the serene composure of a dog who already knew it. He drove home the long way as well. There was a place on the road above Dingle where, if you stopped the car and stood at the wall, you could see the whole bay laid out below you, like something from a dream. The water on a clear day was every shade of blue there is, and several that haven't quite been named yet. And the hills on the far side ran down to the shore in soft folds of green and brown. and somewhere out beyond the headland, barely visible, and trembling slightly in the bright air, was the dark shape of Skellig Michael, rising from the sea. Michael stopped the car. He stood at the wall with his hands in his coat pockets and looked. He thought of the monks out there on that impossible rock 1,000 years ago, living their small and extraordinary lives at the edge of the known world. He thought of all the people he had known on this peninsula, the farmers and their quiet gratitude, the animals in their barns and their pens and their pastures, the lambs arriving in cold dawns, and the old dogs growing still. He thought of his father, steady-handed on the farm, saying there's no rush to most things. He thought of the years in Dublin, the books and the lectures and the noise of the city, and how even then some part of him had always been here, standing at a wall above a bay in Kerry, looking at the sea. He wasn't a man much given to sentiment, or at least he preferred to think he wasn't. But standing there in the clean, bright morning, with the October light falling golden over everything, he felt, with a completeness he couldn't quite account for, that his life had been a good one. Not large or loud or remarkable in the way that history remembers, but good in the way that mattered most, useful and honest, and rooted in this particular beautiful place. A curlew called somewhere below, its long descending cry looping out over the water and fading. Michael stood a while longer. Then he got back into the car and drove home. Moira had made soup. He could smell it before he had even opened the door. Thick and warm and faintly sweet, with parsnip. And the smell of it was so precisely the smell of home that he stood for a moment on the step before going in, just to hold it a little longer. Inside, the kitchen was warm. The fire was going in the sitting room, and the dog was asleep before it, in a pool of afternoon sun. His legs twitching very gently in some pleasant dream. The cat was on the windowsill, watching the garden with the absolute stillness that cats achieve when they are at the deepest level of their own contentment. They ate their soup at the kitchen table, the two of them, with bread that Moira had baked that morning. And they talked in the easy way of people who have shared so many meals together that conversation has long since stopped being an effort and become something more like breathing. She told him about a letter from her sister in Tralee. He told her about Nell's pups and the one with the white patch. She laughed at his impression of Patsy Moriarty, declining to express any emotion whatsoever. He refilled her cup without being asked. That evening, as the light faded over the fields and the sky turned slowly from blue to a deep and tender rose, they sat together in the sitting room, Michael in his chair and Moira in hers, the dog warm across their feet, the fire low and steady. The room was quiet. Outside, the last of the evening birds were settling. The fields were still. Somewhere far off, too far to be intrusive, the sea moved against the shore in its slow and ancient rhythm, the same rhythm it had kept for longer than anyone could possibly imagine, and would keep long after all of them were gone. Michael's book was open in his lap. He was not reading it. He was simply there, in the place he loved, with the person he loved, at the end of a good and ordinary day, feeling the warmth of the fire and the weight of the evening settling gently around him, like something he had been given, without having had to ask for it. His eyes grew heavy. Outside, the stars were beginning to come out over Kerry, one by one, taking their places in the deep and cloudless sky above the hills and the sea and the stone walls and the fields above Skellig Michael, out on the dark water, above all the barns and all the farms and all the sleeping animals and all the people of this quiet county who were settling now, as Michael was settling into the long and peaceful dark. He let his eyes close